That morning felt like any other morning. I woke up to the sound of the birds outside my window, the soft light slipping through the curtains, touching my face gently. I remember stretching my arms and whispering a small prayer for a peaceful day. I had no idea that by the time the sun would set, my whole life would change forever. I made tea for my husband, as I always did. I packed my daughter's lunch for school. I smiled at her when she left, waving from the gate as she ran toward the van, her tiny hands full of dreams and laughter. I remember feeling content, that quiet sense of routine that makes you believe everything is fine. I even hummed a small song while folding the clothes. There was nothing special about that day, at least, not in the beginning. Around noon, I got a call from the office. I worked at a small design company, and my boss told me they were cutting costs. I thought he was joking. I laughed softly and said, "You must be kidding, right?" He sighed and said, "I am sorry. We have to let some people go, and you are one of them." My hands went cold. I stood there in silence, the tea boiling over the stove behind me. I felt something drop inside my chest, like the ground had opened a little and swallowed my balance I had. Worked there for 8 years, and in a single moment, it was gone. I tried to breathe slowly, but everything started to blur around me. I hung up and sat down on the floor, staring at my hands, thinking about the bills, the rent, the fees. I felt like a part of me was fading. When my husband came home that evening, I told him about the job, and I thought he would comfort me. Maybe hold my hand and say we will get through this, but instead his face went hard. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You always said you could handle things. I did not expect this from you." I tried to explain. I told him it was not my fault, but he just kept shaking his head, saying nothing feels right anymore. We argued that night. I said things I did not mean, and he did too. The silence that followed was heavier than words could carry. He left the room and slept on the couch. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, praying for morning to bring peace. But instead, morning brought more pain. The next day, he packed a bag. I asked him where he was going, and he said he needed time to think. I felt like my heart was cracking open. He left without even turning back. Once I stood by the door, watching the man I loved disappear down the street. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My daughter came running, asking where her father was, and I just held her tight, saying he will be back soon, though deep down I was not sure. The world felt strange and hollow. I felt small inside it. By afternoon, I got a call from my landlord. He said he had to increase the rent. I told him I just lost my job, but he said he had no choice. I hung up before he could finish. I went to the kitchen and sat on the floor again, tears falling without permission. I had never felt so powerless. I tried to keep calm for my daughter, but inside, I was falling apart. That night, it rained heavily. I remember standing near the window, looking at the streetlights blur through the water. I whispered to myself, maybe this is just a test. Maybe tomorrow will be better. But when I looked around the house, everything seemed colder, emptier. I went to my daughter's room. She was asleep, hugging her teddy bear. I kissed her forehead and promised her I would never let her feel this pain. I did not know how I would keep that promise, but I said it anyway. Later that week, I received another blow. My mother called from the village, her voice trembling. She said, "Your father is not well." I did not have the money to travel. I felt trapped between duty and despair. I borrowed some money from a friend and took the bus home. I sat by the window, thinking about how quickly everything had fallen apart. In just a few days, I lost my job. My husband had left, and now my father was sick. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? Why did everything collapse at once? But there was no answer. Only the sound of the engine and the rain outside. When I reached home, I saw my father lying weak, but still smiling. He said, "I heard you lost your job, but maybe that means something better is coming." I wanted to believe him. I held his hand and cried. He wiped my tears and said, "Never cry over what is gone. It was never meant to stay." I stayed there for a few days, helping my mother and trying to find strength. But when I returned to the city, things had gotten worse. The electricity bill had come, my rent was overdue, and my husband had not called once. I checked my phone every hour, hoping for a message that never came. That night, I sat on the floor in darkness, holding my daughter in my arms. She whispered, "Mama, are we poor now?" And my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I smiled weakly and said, "No. My love, we are just strong people who will rise again, even if we fall." She fell asleep, but I stayed awake whispering those words again and again, hoping they were true. The next morning I woke up early. Even though I had barely slept, my eyes were heavy, but my mind would not rest. I made tea with the last bit of milk I had left and looked at the sky through the kitchen window. The world looked calm, but inside me, there was a storm. I sat quietly and whispered a small prayer, asking for strength and direction. I knew I could not keep waiting for someone to save me. I had to start saving myself. I looked around the small house. The dishes piled up, the unpaid bills, the silence that had settled into every corner, and I thought I could let this sadness eat me alive. Or I could rise from it. Somehow, I took my notebook and began to write everything I could do to earn something. Anything I wrote. Sewing cleaning, cooking tutoring, and then circled the word sewing, because I remembered my mother had taught me to stitch clothes. When I was young, it was something I had not done in years, but it was something I could try again. That same day, I went to a nearby tailor shop and asked if they needed help. The man looked at me and said, "We are full, but I can give you some small stitching work to do at home." I thanked him and took the fabric he gave me. It was not much, but it was a start. I stayed up late sewing. Under the dim light of a single bulb, my fingers hurt, but my heart felt alive again for the first time in days. I felt useful. I felt like I was building something, even if it was small. Over the next few weeks, I worked harder than I ever had before. I stitched clothes for neighbors. I repaired old shirts and even learned new designs from videos I watched on my old phone. I could not afford the internet, so I would walk to a small cafe nearby and use their Wi-Fi for a few minutes, they thought. I was there for tea, but I was there to learn. I watched tutorials and wrote notes on how to make dresses look new again. It became my quiet mission to create beauty out of what was broken. One day, an old friend from school saw my work and said, "You should post these online." I laughed and said, "Who would care about my clothes? I do not even have proper pictures." She said, "You never know who might be watching." I did not believe her at first, but that night, I took a few photos of my stitched clothes and posted them on a small social page using my phone. I wrote simple captions like "Made with love and hope," and then forgot about it. A week later, someone messaged me asking if I could make a custom dress for her. I said yes, even though I was nervous. She loved it and posted about it on her own page, and then more people started asking. Suddenly, I had small orders coming in from strangers, people I had never met but who believed in my work. I remember sitting on the floor surrounded by fabric and thread tears rolling down my face. But this time, they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of something I had not felt in a long time. Gratitude. Days turned into weeks, and though money was still tight, I started to manage my rent again. My daughter would sit beside me while I worked. She would pass me needles and buttons. She would smile and say, "Mama, one day, you will be famous," and I would laugh, saying, "I just want to make sure you never go to bed hungry." Her laughter filled the house, again, and that sound became my new prayer. It was the sound of hope, returning little by little. One evening as I was working, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and saw my husband standing there. His face looked tired, and his eyes filled with something I could not read at first. He said he was sorry that he had been confused, that he thought leaving would fix things, but it only made him feel emptier. I listened quietly without saying anything. He looked around the room and saw the clothes, hanging neatly in the small table covered in fabric. He said, "You did all this by yourself." I nodded. He sat down and put his face in his hands. I could see his regret, but my heart had changed. I was not the same woman who had cried for him to stay. I was stronger now. I told him I forgave him, but I did not need him to fix me anymore. He said, "I want to help." I said, "Help. If you truly mean it, not because you feel sorry." He nodded slowly and said, "I will start working again too. We can make this work, together." Maybe he stayed that night on the couch just like the first night we had fought. But this time, the silence between us felt softer, not angry, not broken, just quiet and real. The next day, my daughter hugged her father tightly, as if nothing had happened. She said, "I missed you." He lifted her up and cried. I stood there watching them and felt peace for the first time in what felt like forever. I did not know what the future would bring, but I knew I was not afraid anymore. As the weeks went, on orders, for my clothes grew, I started getting messages from people saying my work inspired them. Women who had gone through loss or pain and were trying to rebuild their own lives. I would tell them, start small. Even if the world feels heavy, just take one step and then another. I realized that in helping others, I was healing myself. I also began visiting my parents more often. My father had grown weaker, but he still smiled and said, "See, I told you. Losing your job was not the end. It was just the door to a new life." I held his hand and said, "You were right. As always." He laughed and said, "Never doubt the plans that are written for you, because even pain has a purpose." One night, as I was finishing another dress for a client, I looked at my reflection in the window. I saw a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were calm, her face lined with struggle, but glowing with strength. I whispered to myself, "You made it through. You lost everything once, but you gained yourself, and that is worth everything." Months passed, and my little stitching work had turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. I began getting more orders than I could handle on my own. Sometimes I would stay up all night sewing with soft music playing in the background and my daughter sleeping beside me on the couch. I was tired, but happy, because every piece of fabric I touched reminded me how far I had come from the day I lost everything. One morning, I received a call from a woman who said she owned a small boutique. She had seen my designs online and wanted to meet me. I could not believe it. I had never been to a boutique before, let alone had my work displayed in one. I wore my simplest clothes, tied my hair back, and went to meet her. She showed me around her shop and said, "Your work has something real in it, something that feels alive. I want to sell your designs here." I smiled and said, I would be honored. She gave me my first real contract, and when I came home that day, I cried quietly, not because I was sad, but because I realized the day I thought had destroyed me had actually saved me. With time, my husband and I started rebuilding our relationship slowly. And honestly, he had found a steady job again and began helping me with deliveries and orders. We talked more and argued less. We learned to listen instead of blame. Sometimes I still remembered the pain of that night. He walked away, but it no longer hurt like before. It just reminded me of how strong I had become. My daughter grew up watching me work hard every day. She would tell her friends my mother makes dresses that make people smile, and every time she said that, I felt a kind of pride I could never describe. There was no luxury in our home, no big furniture or shiny walls. But there was peace, and that was something I had once begged for. A year later, I was invited to speak at a local women's event about small businesses. I was nervous because I had never spoken in front of a crowd before, but when I stood on that small stage and looked at the faces in front of me, I saw women who looked just like I once did, scared, tired, but still holding on to hope. I told them my story. I said I lost everything in one day, my job, my marriage, my peace. But that day also showed me who I truly was. I learned that strength is not something you find when life is easy. It is something that grows when everything falls apart, and you decide to keep going. Anyway, after my talk, many women came to me. Some crying, some smiling. One woman held my hands and said I was about to give up. But now I feel like maybe I can try again. I hugged her and whispered, "You can always try again. No matter what the world takes from you, as long as you have faith and courage, you still have everything that matters." Life was not perfect. After that, there were still hard days, bills to pay, late nights, moments of doubt. But none of those things scared me anymore, because I had seen the worst and survived it. Whenever something went wrong, I would remind myself that losing everything once had taught me to rebuild without fear. I was not afraid of falling anymore, because I had learned how to rise. Sometimes at night, when I sat by the window watching the moon, I would remember that one day when everything fell apart, I could still feel the pain in my chest when I thought about it. But now it was a soft pain, like a distant memory that had turned into strength. I realized that day had been the start of my real life, the version of me that no longer depended on others to feel whole, the version that believed in herself. My husband would often tell me, "You changed so much," and I would smile and say, "I did not change, I just found myself." I think he understood, because he would look at me quietly and nod as if he too had learned something from those dark days. We both did. We both learned that love is not just about staying together. It is about growing through the storm and finding your way back to each other. Years later, I opened my own small shop. I named it New Day, because every time I opened its doors, I wanted to remember that the worst day of my life had given me a new one. I watched customers walk in smiling as they touched the dresses hanging on the racks. I told my daughter, "This is what happens when you refuse to give up. When you trust that even in the darkest hour, something beautiful is waiting to be born," she said. "Mama, I am proud of you." And in that moment, I felt everything come full circle. Looking back now, I can say that the day I lost everything was the day I started living, truly. Living without fear, without pretending, without waiting for someone else to fix my world that day. Stripped away everything that was not real, and left me with the one thing that was my own strength. I used to think pain was a curse, but now I know pain is a teacher. It breaks you open, so that the light can finally come through. So when I tell this story, I do not tell it with sadness. I tell it with gratitude. Because that one terrible day saved my life. It showed me that even when everything you love is gone, even when the people you trust walk away, even when the world feels like it has forgotten you, there is still a tiny spark inside that refuses to die. And if you protect that spark, it will grow into a fire that will light your way home. And now when I wake up every morning, I smile at the sunlight falling through my window. The same light that once felt distant now feels like an old friend. I whisper a quiet thank you, because I know that losing everything was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the best chapter of my life. The end.